This is Dr. Margaret Rutherford. I'm a clinical psychologist in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I've been on the Mighty a few times. I'm so delighted to be here and hope you'll join me in this discussion. We're going to be talking about the Netflix series that was done by Selena Gomez. It's 13 Reasons Why. It came out, I believe, in March and has sparked incredible discussion and controversy, and some controversy about the link, suicide, teenage suicide, depression, all the problems that you could have as a teenager, and there were a lot of them in the series. I started watching it because I'm always intrigued about what's going on in our culture about depression or about anxiety, mental health problems, and so I wanted to know. So I watched all 13 hours, and I am going to really ask for your comments and questions today about your own reactions to the series. Could you watch it all? Did you watch it all? Did you watch a little bit of it? I would love to have an interactive kind of thing with you today. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a clinical psychologist. I think I said this a couple minutes ago, in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I've been in practice for over 20 years. I used to see a lot of teenagers. I don't quite see as many of them now as I used to. I do have 2 or 3 now in my practice. I tend to see more college-age kids than adults. So anyway, the 13 Reasons Why just intrigued me. I'll tell you my personal reaction to it. My personal reaction was that the whole aspect of it that had to do with depression was not all that well documented. Certainly we watched Hannah Baker go through a lot of tremendously traumatic experiences, from just bullying through social media, through an actual rape, through a lot of attempts at friendships being denied or revoked, or she was lied to, manipulated. And so it is a tragic story of how that can lead someone to suicide, but I didn't think they did a great job of actually showing us depression. They showed us the struggle. They showed us they did a really good job of interweaving how teenagers influence one another, how when one person takes a picture, a Snapchat, a Instagram picture or whatever, and then puts it up for all to see, how quickly that spreads in the teenage population. It's really incredible. So something that used to just be good gossip, or not so good gossip really, can turn extremely hurtful. I think another message that was there, but that was lost a little bit in all the commentary around it about this was a series about depression and suicide, was that really it was about rape, and it was about the tremendous trauma that can go on in a teenage girl's life. Of course, it also happens to teenage boys. I looked up some statistics on it. Actually, suicide rates, I know, are back up. They've been up. They went down in the 1980s, and they've been steadily climbing since. But there are 13 per 100,000 people now I think the latest was 2014 when the stats come from. And then, but the age group that's most scary, it's still the total age group is a tiny percentage, but girls 10 to 14 tripled in suicides. So it's a very, very serious problem. I've got some comments here. Oh, you saw the whole series. This is Carm. I don't think it touched on mental illness at all. That's what you said. And you, Annie, you thought the show was awful. I would love to hear why you thought the show was awful. I've had my adult patients tell me that they didn't know their children had read the book. They didn't know their children had actually been influenced or were watching the series, and they were aghast that was happening without their knowledge. Certainly the adults in this series looked completely tuned out of their kids' lives, which was, in a way, that was awful for me to see. I don't know about you. I want to talk a little bit about the rape issue. The prevalence of sexual abuse with children, 34% of children under 12, oh, I'm sorry, I should say there were around 63,000 children sexually abused in a year. A third of those are under 12, and 2/3 of those are from the ages of 12 to 17. And then females from the age of 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely to be raped or have an attempted rape or sexual assault. Quinn, I personally have gone through a lot of the same issues as Hannah in high school, and I really think they portrayed it nearly as close as they could have. That's so interesting, Quinn. I like how it showed that the others. Michaela, I like how it showed that the things others say can lead to a much worse cause. Yeah. That, especially, I mean, when I grew up, yeah, you went to school and at the cafeteria at lunch you heard something bad about somebody, but you would talk to somebody else and they didn't know what you were talking about if you were a gossiper. It's all over everywhere now. And as you say, the way we influence each other's lives, and of course their peers are so important to them. So we really have to tune into that. I remember, I have a son who's 22 now, soon to be 23, and I can remember I was perplexed when he would say all these friends that he had. And I would think, well, they haven't been over to the house, and he doesn't go anywhere with them, I don't think. What is he talking about, all his friends? In fact, I thought, I was a little worried. I thought he was like pretending to be a little more social than he really was. But then I got on social media when I started blogging back in 2012. And I made all these friends through social media. And I have people I know in Northwest Arkansas, but I only know them through social media. So, and I'm an adult. So, and I'm not, I have a job and I work. And so I'm not on my phone all the time. So, for teenagers, these kids they know them and understand them. And I'm sure you with children know that. I hope you do. Okay, more comments. These are great. Thank you so much. My daughter, okay, you're telling me why you didn't like it, Carm. Was 11. I had her start watching it after the 3rd episode. Also found that it doesn't show them how to get help. Yeah, they did have a hotline number of some kind there, no, you could go to their web page. That's what it was. And I didn't go. I should have gone, especially knowing I was going to do this. But they did say if you have feelings, go to their webpage and they would have information, but they did not have it directly, which I agree with you was a problem. Brandon, I just wish it showed how things get better. Coming from an ex-suicidal drug addict, it gets better. Put in the work needed. Yeah. Again, the counselor went over his head. He didn't get it. I thought he was portrayed somewhat fairly because really I've known school counselors. One of my best friends is a school counselor, and she tells me how hard she has to work to get kids in. She has these little snippets of information about them, what their grades are, all that kind of thing. But that's not really enough to know that this is going on. So in their defense, they have a lot of kids to try to understand and take the pulse of the culture in their school. So I'm sure it's an incredibly difficult job. But they didn't really show. None of the characters got help. None of the people that were in trouble looked to their parents for help or looked to a therapist for help or went to the school counselor. Not until the young girl did, who actually ended going to the police or something toward the end. I can't remember which character name she was, but someone did finally turn for help, turn to adults especially. Crystal, just finished the show last night. So eye-opening to a parent of 2 teen boys. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. It brought me to speak to my son last night. Oh, good. I guess they were doing some advertising for it, and that's really good. Yeah, I have recommended to my adult patients that they watch with their kids. If their kids want to watch, and if they're old enough and mature enough to watch, then to watch it with them. And not to let them tell you what their experience is, rather than preaching to them about what you're seeing. Let them tell you how they're experiencing it. Is it like what they see at school? Sometimes it might not be. is it like what they see at school? And if it is, then how do you have ways to help guide them through that? Obviously, if there's alcohol or pot use, that's a whole nother issue. Okay, Heather Marie, I didn't like the show either. It blamed other people for her suicide. But suicide is so much more than one person's actions in someone's life. Yeah, that was kind of troubling, wasn't it? The whole premise of the show, for those of you who may not have watched it, it starts out that Hannah Baker has committed suicide, and we know that from the very beginning. But she made these tapes that she sent out to 12 people. It was called 13 people, but I don't know if there were 12 or 13. 13 episodes that she thought had influenced her in a very painful, negative way, or even traumatic way. And it was kind of like one of those games where you tell somebody something, then they turn to somebody else and tell them, and then they were supposed to pass the tapes around. And they were, in fact, almost threatened with, if you don't, something bad will happen, or people will know things about you that you don't know they know. And so you really wanted to know what other kids knew, and so you went on listening to find out what you had done to, influence her to commit suicide. But there was, I kept watching it going, wow, this is one angry young girl. And she wanted, it does have a sense of revenge to it, that's for sure. There was some talk, if you remember, during certain episodes about what she was saying was not other people's perception, that maybe she had lied about certain thing or not remembered certain things correctly. And of course, if you've been depressed, you know that your judgment, your rationale can be skewed. You can take things personally that weren't personally meant. You're in a very deep hole, and so or getting in one, and so a lot of the things that you believe are simply not accurate. Some are, but some are not. Let me read another comment. These are wonderful. I think they didn't show that Hannah got help because sometimes that happens. Suicide happens. I like the portrayals in the show. They touched on very hard subjects that need to be talked about. You're right, Jasmine. I guess, certainly I have seen a lot of people whose husband, whose child has committed suicide, and they had absolutely no idea that there was depression or even suicidal ideation in that person's mind. And I have helped people wade through that. It is extremely difficult. And a lot of portrayals of what I saw in the series is what I see in therapy when I'm trying to help these people. There's defensiveness, there's like the young man who really was one of the leads, who was listening to the tapes and telling us they told his story more than anybody else's. And I am blanking on his name right now. It starts with a C, Casey or something like that. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. There's a tremendous sense of guilt. I should have seen, I should have known. The mother was just anguished about what had happened. And she kept remembering things that Hannah had done like normal teenage girls do, and not understanding how underneath all that there could have been such pain. I'd like to know from some of you if it triggered any of you, either from maybe your own childhoods, or was it hard to watch because of your own depression? If some of you could talk about that a little bit, I'd appreciate it. The other thing I think, and I'll get to a question in a second, the other thing I think was really important to talk about is the secrecy secrecy about alcohol use, secrecy about pot use, secrecy about being hurt, being raped and not telling anyone, secrecy about what was being Snapchatted about you all over school. I mean, these teenagers keeping all of this secret from their parents, that's troubling, isn't it? I know that my kid kept secrets from me. And when we were driving him to college, he said, now you want to know what my summer was really like? But, they weren't secrets like this. They weren't really harmful secrets. They were secrets that are kind of appropriate for a kid because, they've got to have some independence from parents. So let me go to questions again. You're in Malta, Sarah. Unfortunately, many people in my country took it as a joke. They're making fun of suicide and didn't really get the message of this TV show. I don't know what more could be done. That's an interesting comment. They took it as a joke. Wow, I wonder what the whole climate about depression is in your country. Do they take depression as a joke? That's such an interesting comment. Thank you. I wonder if some of those of you who are listening internationally could also speak about that. Yeah, Halo. I think the biggest problem is that there isn't a real open line of communication between parents and children. Parents are in the dark and the kids are lost. Yeah. I know lots of parents who say, okay, randomly they say, give me your phone. I want to see your texts. I want to see what you're looking at picture-wise. And they do it very assertively, but there are many, many others that do not. They give their child a phone. They provide it for them, but they don't guide them through it. They don't. And I know, gosh, my mother used to take my little princess phone away from me, and I would be mad at her. But, she was a good parent, and I was staying up too late. And so, that's what good parents do. But we have a lot of bad parenting going on, don't we? Oh, a bunch. Heather, I think as an adult watching the show, it gives you perspective on how things said and done to another truly affect them, how all the situations compound on each other, making someone lose hope when they feel they don't have anyone there for them. I'm not sure that a child or teenager watching it would be able to understand that take on it. I wish it would have had more dialogue regarding ways to get help. Interested to see what they do with season 2. Yeah, I don't know if there'll be a season 2. Uh-oh, my document just went away. Hold on. Guess I ran out of steam or something. I know this is fascinating to watch. Ah, there it is again. Yeah, I don't know how they would do episode 2. But you may know more than I. Maybe there is talk about trying to look at another problem the same way or something like that. I don't know. I'd love to hear more from you about that. Again, if any of you has trouble watching it because of your own depression, or were you depressed as a child and this reminded you of that? If you were depressed as a child, did you tell anybody? Did you get help? Did you resist getting help, and then once you were in therapy, you really appreciated it? I don't think my son would mind me saying that there were a couple of times that he had some emotional difficulties, and we got him in play therapy. He was really young, and he did great. So a few sessions, and he was better, and that was an important thing for us to tune into. He's a psychologist kid, so of course he's got problems, right? But, we attended to them, and he's got a very open attitude about mental health now as an adult. So I think that's, it wasn't hard for me to do, but, we had to look at ourselves honestly and say, we're making some mistakes and we need to attend to them. Nobody's perfect, right? Okay, Annie, there was a scene in which a girl says to a character, it's what you do instead of killing yourself, about self-harm or along those lines. I thought it was an awful scene to throw in. Oh, it's what you do instead of killing yourself, about self-harm. Sorry, didn't quite understand the comment until then. So, yeah, it was almost like, oh, you may have feelings of wanting to hurt yourself, but just cut instead. Yeah, that was not great. But maybe that's how a teenager reasons it out. And certainly I know that from the people who have cut and that talk to me about it, they do experience some kind of release. It's temporary, of course, and that's the problem. But, and obviously there's some danger to it. But, yeah, it was, again, I think they were trying to speak to teenagers. So, an interesting comment. I wonder if really teenagers, we probably got it a lot less in some ways, and we got things they didn't get from the show, and then they got things we didn't get from the show. Nathan Hunt, it was from her perspective, so of course it blamed others. Well, you're right. That's generally how suicidal people feel. Other people can definitely influence whether or not you feel the need to die. It's generally how suicidal people feel. Do I agree with that? Um, my what I've read about people who really study suicide, and I'm not one of those people, but is that a lot of people, it's not some suicides are about anger, you betcha. Some suicides are about, in fact, I was involved in one, they are about revenge, they are about being angry and blaming other people. But a lot of times a suicide is more about, I don't think I am worth it to anybody. My life doesn't make a difference to anybody else. They would be better off without me. And there's a justification of the suicide because of that, a lot of times. And that's more anger toward the self, I think. Now, of course, as you point out, that may be sometimes how you've been treated, if you've been rejected or ignored or manipulated or whatever. So it's an important point, Nathan, but I do think there's some discussion there about major reasons why people commit suicide. Mandy, I liked this series. It was very eye-opening as to the effects of bullying and teen depression. It was hard to swallow, but as a mom who struggles with depression, with MS, with multiple suicide attempts and 8 years of self-harm prior to having a kid, it was a good reminder to watch for the signs and ask my kids about bullying and talk to my kids about the way they feel. Wow, Mandy, you've had a journey. My gosh. I hope you're better, and I hope that you don't have those thoughts anymore. Certainly our children learn from us, and Michael Yapko, whose work I really, really like, talks about that children will learn how to have depressed thinking from their parents. If you avoid talking about conflict, if they're trying to talk about their feelings and you don't allow them to, if they see you handling things with only anger and not admitting that you feel sad about something or you feel lost or afraid, they will mimic that behavior. You can teach someone to have depressive thinking or to look on the negative side of things, that kind of thing. So he talks a lot about how depression is catching in families. I also get his newsletter, and here's some more statistics for you. There was a huge study with 100,000 kids that came out in Translational Psychiatry, if you happen to have a copy of that lying around. And it said that by the age of 17, 13.6% boys would have had, and they acknowledged having depression. 13.6%. Girls, this is going to astound you, 36.1% of girls have had some kind of depression before the age of 17. That is huge. It's 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6-ish boys. So, no, 1 in 8 boys. So, and again, we probably have the problem with boys that even using a computer testing, which they did, which tends to lend validation. You'll say something to a computer that you won't say to a person. It's still, boys might have more trouble admitting it, right? Okay, so I think that huge in trying to think about our teens and even our children and depression. More comments. I love this. Heather Marie again. I lost someone to suicide when I was 17 years old. I've spent the last 20 years trying to get over the guilt I felt in my part of that person's life. The show was a trigger for me. And I could feel myself questioning everything I've worked hard on trying to get over the guilt. Yeah. I can well imagine. Sorry, sometimes I'm quiet. I have to think through my response. I hope that you do work through that. I'm sure it did bring to mind things that you'd already worked through and maybe re-triggered some of that. As someone else mentioned earlier, and I believe Nathan said, well, of course, from her perspective, it was about other people. People with depression, especially probably teenagers, don't necessarily even feel that they have the resources to work through that kind of alienation or sadness. I also had a friend commit suicide when I was in high school. He wrote me a note, and my mother wouldn't let me read it. She destroyed it, which really angered me, but because I wanted to know if he had been thinking about me, what he was thinking, or how he was thinking. So now I'll never know. She was doing the best she could. I'm sure she thought, I don't know if she read it and thought it would be upsetting to me or whatever. But so working through that is so important. We're imperfect human beings. This young man, my friend, was a very quiet guy. He was the yearbook photographer. It's one of the reasons why we hung out so much, because I was the sports editor, and there were a lot of pictures for sports, and we would hang out and laugh and talk, but he was quiet. And after he died, I thought so many times, did I ever ask him what his life was like? Or we never went for a Coke after school or anything. I mean, we weren't that kind of friend. We were hang out at high school kind of friend. And so I can remember those feelings distinctly. There's always something else you could have done. Always. And but that doesn't mean that you need to feel guilty about it, because the guilt will only cause you to live your life in the past and not in the present. So you really want to work through that guilt, and we can only be as sensitive as we can in that moment. And the secret card they have in their hand is that they are considering suicide. You don't know that. If you knew that, you'd act differently, right? If I'd known my friend was thinking about, well, I won't tell you, but was thinking about doing what he was doing, then I would have gone to his house. I would have said, no, get help, come on, So that's the secrecy, and the card they're holding is very potent. Okay, back to the comments. Ed Birmingham says, I saw the show and I thought it displayed the people who are left behind to pick up the pieces as well. Or pick up the pieces, it displayed them well. A relative of mine took her own life. I felt I could relate to Clay, that's the guy's name, Clay. At the time, not knowing what to do, ending up blaming other people and blaming myself. Yeah, that's, again, very common. And I thought it did too, Ed. I thought that if someone was considering it, that they might pause if they watched it to realize, especially the despair and angst of the parents. And they depicted the school as pretty defensive, and I don't know if that's fair or not. Maybe it is. Schools get sued, and maybe they're trying to protect themselves, but I imagine the people within the schools, felt a lot of pain, do feel a lot of pain when a child commits suicide. They're also worried, as the schools have been worried, and one of the criticisms of the series was that it romanticized suicide, and the schools especially were scared of it turning into a series of suicides, which does happen. I don't know. I've not read if that has been asserted anywhere, that people feel like they might have had a child commit suicide and it was triggered by this. That may exist. I don't know. Good points. Giselle says, I think it showed more bullying and rape than mental illness. Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't think they represented Hannah's depression well. I've been through some suicide attempts. It was very hard to watch her commit suicide. They portrayed her as someone who was a bit manipulative, but they didn't really explain why. Yeah, you know what? That's a great point. I feel like they could have explained her depression better. Many, many teens took the show as a joke and started creating memes because of that. Yeah, but we all know that teenagers also avoid feeling by laughing. So it doesn't mean they weren't feeling anything. It means that they were stuffing that away somewhere, right? So could have done better with Hannah's character. Yeah, we don't necessarily know. She was kind of cocky, kind of sarcastic, maybe had a little bit of a chip on her shoulder, and we have no clue where that came from. Yeah, don't know. Good point. But I guess maybe the book does a better job of that. There is a book, if you didn't know, there is a book that the series was adapted from. So perhaps the book explains that more. I have not read it. So Okay, what time are we going to be? 1:30. Okay, I want to read somebody else's. Uh-oh. Chaudhuri Taki, I think teenage people should watch educational things with kindness and peace rather than this type of tragic one. It's an interesting comment. Yeah, well, you know what just immediately came to mind? Even the Disney movies usually start out with a parental death, or many of them do. You know, The Lion King comes to mind. So a lot of stories are based on loss, grief, trouble. Happiness, unfortunately, doesn't get a lot of airplay. So I get your point in that certainly teaching children how to achieve some kind of peaceful state is important. I will say that there seem to be many efforts here in the United States. I don't know if you're from the United States, but many efforts here in the United States to introduce meditation to children and teenagers. And it can be highly effective. I've read some studies where if a school will institute a meditation program, that test scores go up, anxiety, good things happen, and children, I don't know, I'm not sure what the measures were that they look at, but so there's some efforts in that direction as well. Good point, though. Let me see. Sunny Hirschfield says, I always say you can't prevent what you don't know. Well, yeah, you're right about that. Men to Mind, it's a disorder, not a decision. Says, a lot of people seem to complain about the lack of discussion about mental illness in the show, but surely suicide doesn't always stem from mental illness. What are your thoughts on that? I'm thinking. That's a great question, and one I've actually asked myself. Do you have to be mentally ill to commit suicide? I guess it depends on whether you believe suicide to be, or thoughts of suicide to be part of self-destructiveness, which is a part of many mental illnesses and certainly a part of some personality disorder problems, or if you consider suicide sort of an escape, or for example, somebody who has terminal cancer or Alzheimer's or someone like that, and they either want assisted suicide or they kill themselves. Is that mental illness? Some people would think so. I personally do not. I think they are assessing the situation and for many reasons decide that that's what they want to do. Again, I'm stepping out I'm not an expert in this. These are my own personal feelings. And of course, there are many spiritual people that believe it's a sin or a mortal sin. So there are those group of people. But I think probably a large percentage of people with suicide who have not talked about committing suicide probably have hidden depression. I actually, if you're interested in me or what I had to say, I do talk myself about perfectly hidden depression, both on my podcast, which is Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford, or my website, which is drmargaretrutherford.com. And that is a kind of depression I don't think we talk about enough in our culture, where people are actively creating a persona that people buy into, that their lives are going great, they've got great friends, they're successful, they're maybe somewhat anxious or, have a lot of stuff going on in their lives, but they have this secret loneliness, despair, emptiness, and sometimes it's not intentional. They're not intentionally creating a persona. It's actually they've done it for so long, and they began it in childhood, that it's just become a way of functioning. And I think suicidal ideation can creep up on those people. In fact, I've written about it, and people have emailed me about it, One man said he had a gun in his mouth when his wife texted him, "I don't know, but this morning something sounded wrong," and he got himself to a hospital. So, and he didn't have any signs of depression. So I hope it's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but those would be my thoughts off the cuff about it. Thanks, great question. We're going to end up here pretty soon. Sydney Davis will be the last comment I read. I'll try to get to these. I've got some appointments later this afternoon, but later in the afternoon I'll get to these other comments and do my best at answering at least some of them. Thank you so much for being so involved. Sydney Davis, in my life, the mental health topic has been often pushed aside, and I think that individuals are hating this story because it's so real, just not wanting to be addressed. That's an interesting comment, that we kind of want mental illness to go away, stick it in a corner somewhere, except when someone who is severely mentally ill does something violent, or if they have psychosis or something, and then we all want to talk about mental illness and blame mental illness for the problems of our culture, but we don't want to talk about more chronic mental illness or people managing their mental illness and managing it very well a lot of the times. So you're right, and maybe part of the pushback against this show is that it is on a topic that we are uncomfortable in our culture talking about. So I'm working very hard to try to talk about mental illness. I've actually talked about my own mental illness. I have panic disorder. I'm very nervous right now. So anyway, there's some great organizations like Stigma Fighters, Sarah Fader's Stigma Fighters, Mental Health on the Mighty, This Is My Brave by Jennifer Marshall, who are all very active in social media trying to get people to talk more openly about their own mental illness. Again, if you want to tune in to more of what I have to offer, I talk about depression, I talk about relationship issues. I've been a therapist for over 20 years, and I love what I do and love sharing the wisdom that I've learned from other people. And you can find me on my new podcast, relatively new podcast, Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Self-Work, SELFWORK, Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. That's on iTunes or Stitcher. Or you can come to my website and find it at drmargaretrutherford.com. I have a Facebook page. It's also facebook.com, Dr. Margaret Rutherford. You can check that in. I'm on Twitter at Dr._Margaret. Oh, and I have a new book. It's a little tiny book. It's a gift book, really. And it's for sale on Amazon. It's called Marriage is Not for Chickens. And it's literally, you can read it in 5 minutes, okay? But it's meant as a gift for someone who's engaged, married, maybe an anniversary. It's under $10. It's a post that I did several years ago, 3 years ago, and it got 200,000 likes and over 50,000 shares on the Huffington Post. So I decided to make it into a little book. And it has a lot of beautiful photographs in it. So maybe that's something you might want to think about. I've never sold anything before, so I'm a little uncomfortable doing that. But anyway, I hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining me. Great comments. Thank you, Ashley, for being on the other end of this with the Mighty. And she's my new Facebook Live editor, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Ashley. So thanks so much. Okay, y'all take care. Have a great day. I'll be back next month with another topic on depression. Thanks so much. Bye.